Hello, Bellevue family, and welcome to our Wednesday night lesson this week as we continue our study of Ecclesiastes. This week, we're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, the next to the last chapter in this great book. Hopefully, from the email that was sent out earlier today, you got a link to the handout that you can download, which has the questions that we're going to work through. This chapter only has 10 verses, but we've got 9 sets of questions to go with those 10 verses. And if you look at the 10 verses, they really kind of deal with 2 topics. The first topic is one that has been kind of, the last couple of chapters that he's kind of dealt with a little bit, which is how do we deal with, the uncertainties of life? How do we deal with not knowing what's going to happen in the future? What should that cause us to do? And then the second part of this chapter is for the things that we do know are going to happen in the future, that we, for the certainties that are happening in the future, how should that impact present behavior, impact the things that we're doing in our life right now? So with that in mind, let's jump in with verse 1 and we'll look at the questions. So I'm actually going to read verses 1 and 2 together because I've got 2 sets of questions, but these are really very much related to each other. He says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth." Now, the questions that I have related to verse 1 are, what is the Qoheleth instructing the reader to do when he says to, quote, "cast your bread upon the waters"? What does he say will be the result of this action? And then the questions that I have for verse 2 is, why does the Qoheleth counsel the reader to give a serving to 7 and also to 8? How will this protect us from evil? Now, if you were to look up these verses in a commentary, you might find some commentaries or commentators that think that, this is talking about being generous. Casting your bread on the waters, giving a portion to 7 or 8, that this is talking about being generous or being full of charity. But if you look in the larger context of where these verses occur, I don't think that the Qoheleth, that Solomon, is talking about generosity. I think he's talking about action and commerce, if you will, and working in view of not knowing what's going to happen in the future. As we get to verses 3, 4, 5, 6, you're going to see that all of those deal with not knowing for certain what's going to happen in the future, not what's going to happen tomorrow, and how that should impact things like business dealings. And so I think this is the same, these 2 verses deal with the same thing. Rather than generosity and charity, these are dealing with, what we should do with our labor, what we should do with our work, if you will. And so verse 1, when he says, "cast your bread on the waters, for you will find it after many days," I looked up this verse in some other translations, and there's a translation which is not a very common translation, but it's actually a pretty good one, called the New English Bible, and they translated it this way: "Send your grain across the sea, and in time you will get a return." And I think that does a pretty good job of capturing what the Qoheleth is saying here, that even though we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, that cannot be an excuse for laziness, for inaction. We still have to cast our bread on the waters. We have to send our grain across the sea. We have to engage in work. We have to work for a living. We have to work so that, we can try different things to be able to earn an income, to be able to have the things that we need to be able to get through life. This reminds me a lot of Jesus' parable of the talents in Matthew 25. And I'm not going to go into detail on that, but we know that story, that it's all about what in that case, what God is expecting us to be doing while he is away. Now that Christ has gone to heaven and we're awaiting his return, what does God expect us to do? Well, he expects us to take what we have and use it. And so this is the same thing. Even though we don't know what's coming, there's uncertainty about tomorrow, that's not an excuse for inaction. We have to take what we have and we have to use it. Now, I have this in the notes, but the proverb, "nothing ventured, nothing gained," is something that's similar, I think, to what the Qoheleth is saying here. Now, in verse 2, when he talks about giving a portion to 7 or even to 8, I think this is in line with the saying that we have today of not putting all your eggs in one basket. That the more we diversify the things that we're involved in, the more likely we are to have a return on our activity, a return on our work. The New English Bible translates that this way: divide your merchandise among 7 ventures, 8 maybe, since you do not know what disasters may occur on earth, and then they have in italics, or on land. That, if we put everything into one thing, that the chance of something happening to that is great. But if we put, divide our ventures, divide our work among multiple things, then we're more likely to see a return, because disaster can happen to any of the things that we're involved in. And so, again, this is just practical advice about living life under the sun, not knowing the workings of God, not knowing what's going to happen in the future. Let's go down to verses 3 and 4. The writer continues, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. And the question I have, 2 questions, is what 2 examples are given of the things that are inevitable? How should a wise man react to these things? And the 2 examples are, he says, when a cloud is full of rain, it's going to empty itself on the earth. It's going to rain. So when a cloud is full of water, it's going to rain. And then the second one is, if a tree falls, it's going to stay there. That's the way of nature. But the way in which he is, the advice that he's giving here is that, we can observe the laws of nature. We can observe things that are supposed to happen. But if we wait to act until we can foresee all possibilities, until we think that conditions are absolutely perfect, then we may miss our opportunity. And so he says, he who observes the wind will not sow. If we're waiting for the perfect time to plant, and we let that pass because those perfect conditions never come, then we're not going to sow. And if we wait for the perfect conditions to reap what we have sown, if we wait for those perfect conditions, they may never come, and we may miss our opportunity to reap. And so again, the thought here is the same. Even though we can't predict exactly what's going to happen, even though we can know the laws of nature, we cannot wait to be active. We cannot wait to work, to take action, to use, what God has given us and apply it to our lives. Let's go down to verse 5. He says, as you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. And the question that I have there is, what example illustrates our inability to comprehend the ways of God? And the example here is the mystery of how life comes into the fetus, when the fetus is in the womb of the mother, that it's a mystery to us exactly how we can know the mechanics of how a baby is born. But as far as knowing exactly how life comes to that fetus, that is a mystery to us. And taking that to the bigger scale is that the workings of God are a mystery to us. Just like that one thing is a mystery to us, the workings of God are far beyond our comprehension. And this kind of underpins everything that we've been talking about so far in this chapter, that we can't understand fully the workings of God. Earlier he had talked about eternity being set on the hearts of man. We want to figure it out. We want to understand it, but we're not capable of understanding it. But we can't allow that lack of understanding of the mysteries of God to keep us from living the way we should, from working, from doing the things that we're supposed to do. A couple of passages that jump to mind thinking about the mysteries of God's plan, the mysteries of the workings of God. From Isaiah chapter 40, I know I've referenced this passage numerous times in Ecclesiastes, but I think it's so relevant. Isaiah speaking prophetically to Judah in the future, when they're enduring Babylon captivity. He says, have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. And listen to this, his understanding is unsearchable. We can't know the workings of God, his understanding. And then in the 11th chapter of Romans, again, I know I've referenced this before, but the very end of chapter 11, he says, oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. Again, God's working is beyond our comprehension. Now, again, we cannot use that as an excuse to say, well, because I don't understand what God's doing, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to work. I'm not going to use what I have. The Qoheleth is making the opposite, giving the opposite instruction to say, even though we don't know what's coming, we have to make use of the time that we have to work, to be active, to use what God has given us. Now, let's go down to verse 6. This is kind of the last verse in this first section about, what we should be doing even though we don't know what's coming. He says, verse 6, in the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand. For you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. And the questions that I have there is, how does the Qoheleth encourage diligence? Why should we be diligent in our work? And this, I think this verse, really sums up this section that says, we should work, morning, evening. Don't restrict the times in which you are working, which you are using the things that you have. You're doing the things that you should be doing, because we don't know which activities that we engage in are going to prosper. They're going to result in having returns. And because of that, we need to not be lazy, not be inactive. We need to be working, using the things that God has given us. And again, that's what this whole section is about. That if we don't know what's coming, we don't know what's going to happen, we still have to continue to work. Now, the last few verses 7 through 10, have a little different slant, because now he's going to shift to talking about something in the future that is certain, that is a guarantee, and how that should impact our present behavior. Go down to verse 7. He says, light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. Now, what this is all pointing toward is that there are coming days of darkness. And I think what he's talking about is kind of the cycle of life, that, as we get older and our body wears down and deteriorates, our eyes fade, as we have that part of our future is certain, and death is a certainty. And so with that in view, he starts off by saying, well, light is sweet and is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. I think there he's talking about, the time of youth, the time of vitality, the time of vigor, when we're at the pinnacle of physical existence. He said that time in our life is sweet. That time in our life is enjoyable. All things seem like they're possible when we're young and our future is out ahead of us and our eyes are bright and our strength we have our strength about us. But, the beginning of this is kind of thinking about the events of the garden back in Genesis 2 and 3, because from the point in which mankind disobeyed God by taking of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, man's destiny has been set to where, our bodies decay and it leads to darkness. And that, kind of brings up to verse 8. He says, so if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. And so here he's now talking about that certain future, that, our bodies are going to decay. Our bodies are going to fade. The light is going to fade. And we have to live our life with that in view. And the questions that I have in there, what should we do every day that we have life? What should we keep in mind? And the instruction here is that rejoice in all the days that you have. Don't say, well, I'll rejoice when all these things happen. That's human nature, to say that I'm going to rejoice at some point in the future when I've got everything figured out, when all the things are going my way, when I have the things that I want, that's when I'm going to find joy. But he says, no, rejoice every day of your life. Find joy in everything that you do. He has said many times that is only possible by striving to please God, that God gives us the ability to enjoy our life no matter what's happening. And this is the same advice. Take joy in your life every day that you have it to live, because there's coming, future darkness, future death. So enjoy your life. Stay in the moment. Stay present. Very similar to something that he said earlier in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 that I have referenced in the handout, where he says, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. If we live in view of knowing that there's going to be an end to this life, it's going to help us make the most of the present. And that's what this is all about. Make the most of the present. Make the most where you are. Enjoy living wherever you are. Don't be waiting for something in the future to say, that's when I'm going to be happy. That's when I'm going to find joy. That means we're putting our faith in those things in this life. Instead, put your faith in God and find joy now. Find joy no matter where you are. Go down to verse 9. He says, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things, God will bring you to judgment. The questions that I have for this one are, what does the Qoheleth encourage the young man to do? Yet what does he also encourage him to remember? There's two things here. One is, he is encouraging the young man, those of their youth, to enjoy their life. Live life to the fullest. Live life and enjoy your life. Now, if he just stopped there, some might say, well, he's encouraging us to do whatever we want to do. He's encouraging those that are young to live however they want to live, whether that's sinful or not. But that's where the second part comes in. He says, remember that all these things God will bring you to judgment. So live life to its fullest, but know that you are always under the eye of God and that everything will be brought in to judgment. And so we have to make the most of the life that we have while serving God. We have to make the most of what we have while living a holy life, living a life of faith in God, but make the most of the time that we have right now rather than waiting for something to happen in the future. Go down finally to verse 10. He says, remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. And the question that I have there is, so what else does the Qoheleth counsel the young man to do, and why? And, I think the message here is that, even when we're young, there are troubles that we have to deal with. We deal with, even though that's kind of the pinnacle of strength and vitality and, the future looking bright, we also, when we're young, deal with things that are troubling, deal with anxiety, deal with stresses, deal with pressures. And I think he's telling them, deal with that stuff now. Deal with, taking the trouble and pulling it away from you. Do that now. Don't say, I'm going to live, I'm going to embrace all of these things. I'm going to embrace all of the sinful things of life is one example now, and then later I will, live the way I'm supposed to. Instead, put away that pain from your body now. Put away the difficult things now. It reminds me very much of what Paul wrote in Colossians chapter 3. Beginning in verse 8, he says, but now you must put them all away. Anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of his Creator. And so he's telling the young people, deal with the temptations that you're facing now. Put those things away now. Don't wait for some future event or some future time to say, hey, I'll get my act together later. Put those things away now and live a life to its fullest, but live your life to God. One of the things I have in the note, the young must be able to say no as well as yes. When we're young, it's easy to say, yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. But we have to learn, those that are young have to learn to be able to say no to things at that time. And if we learn to say no to things when we're younger, it's much easier when we're older. And so learn those things now. So to summarize this chapter again, the first 6 verses deal with how do we live in view of the uncertainties of life? Not knowing the workings of God, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. How should that cause us to act? And the general message is we have to live. We have to live. We have to work. We have to invest. We have to use the things that God has given us. Even though we don't know what's going to happen, even though we don't know what kind of return we're going to receive, we have to live our lives and use what God has given us to earn a living, to provide for our family, to serve Him. We have to use what we have. And in the second half, verses 7 through 10, it's all a little different because there is a future that is certain, and that is that we're going to fade, we're going to die. And so how do we live in view of that? And that's make the most of your life right now. Rejoice in all the days that you are alive instead of looking to the future and saying, someday I'm going to be happy. Someday I'm going to get my life together. Why not do it now? Why not do it now? And I think that's a powerful message for us, not only as Christians, but as humans, because the human instinct is to say, I can make myself happy by doing things and acquiring things. But as Solomon has said over and over again in this book, all of that does is lead to vanity. So instead, rejoice now, live life to the fullest now, but while you're serving God. Thanks for joining us this week. A little bit shorter lesson. Lord willing, next week we will close out the book of Ecclesiastes before we move into our next study. Thanks for being with us, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.